Turkey's president throwing his full weight into Sunday's referendum.
The result has been too narrow to settle anything for good.
Despite one-sided coverage,
Applause for a narrow victory. Turkey votes yes to change its constitution.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. Here are some of the media stories we're covering this week. President Erdogan prevails in Turkey's referendum, but was that because he got more than his fair share of the coverage?
You have to allow me to speak.
To provide a platform or not to provide a platform? That is just one of the questions facing journalists covering the far right. British Prime Minister Theresa May calls a snap election. But it turns out the lady is not for turning up at television debates. And France's presidential election, blurring the line between politics and heavy metal. Sometimes when assessing the coverage of a major news story, it helps to do the math. The constitutional referendum in Turkey last weekend, which ended in a narrow yes vote and a victory for President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, is one such story. According to figures released by a Turkish opposition party, the rallies, speeches, and political events of the No campaign attracted a total of 45 hours of live news coverage on the Turkish airwaves over a campaign lasting 8 weeks. The yes side, led by President Erdogan, had more than 10 times as much, 485 hours of live news coverage. That imbalance was one of the issues that led the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, to declare that the referendum had been contested on an unlevel playing field. The Turkish media landscape has been in transformation ever since Erdogan first took power as prime minister in 2003, with most critical voices, particularly on the television side, falling in line with the government. Since last year's failed coup, more than 170 media outlets have been shut down, and dozens of reporters are behind bars, cementing Turkey's reputation as the world's leading jailer of journalists. As for international media outlets portraying the president as increasingly authoritarian, Erdogan is having none of it. He dismisses criticism from Europe as politically motivated, the work of Turkey's enemies, and says that the people have spoken. Our starting point this week is the Turkish capital, Ankara. A referendum, according to its dictionary definition, is a general vote by the electorate on a single political question. But is it really possible, in Turkey's case, to hold a vote on a single question, constitutional reform, when the question asked, the bulk of the information presented, and most of the explanations provided all come from a leader as dominant, as visible, as ubiquitous as President Erdogan?
If you look at the results of Turkish elections, it's all pretty consistent. People in this country have political views, they consume their own media that corresponds to their political views, and they vote according to those views. They're voting less on the merits of the Constitution, less on the arguments that they see in the media, and more on what they see as Erdogan having done or not done for them.
But it's important to stress that people voting yes didn't know anything about the context. When we asked why they voted yes, the answer was Erdogan related. If Erdogan wants it, we'll vote yes. In other words, there's been a personality cult created around him, which directly influences the way people vote.
The most significant change in the Constitution is that it gives enormous power to the president. That's an undeniable fact. And in a country where the media is so weak under a one-man regime, and it's definitely a one-man regime, freedom of press will be eradicated.
The referendum question that passed, barely, fundamentally reshapes the government, turning a parliamentary democracy into a presidential republic. It arms Erdogan with the power to limit Parliament's ability to amend new laws, to dissolve the assembly if he wishes, and to unilaterally impose states of emergency. In covering the campaign, Turkish broadcasters seemed slightly ahead of the curve, acting as though the president was already all-powerful. They gave his yes side 10 times more live coverage than the no side received, and shied away from the kinds of questions his critics wanted asked.
Sayın Cumhurbaşkanımız Recep Tayyip Erdoğan'la söyleşiye başlıyoruz.
Onun karşısında
We've seen plenty of deferential presenters who can hardly keep their composure in Erdogan's presence. They almost fall off their chairs. They behave apologetically in front of him.
Hangi maddeden başlamak istersiniz?
And are ready to confirm whatever he says.
One can't help but ask, is there any media now that aren't pro-government? For almost 10 years, it's been very clear that the AK Party leadership has tried to create its own media sector and has pretty much achieved it. So the referendum took place at a time when we had no alternative critical media voices.
Gerçekleşti.
Which does not seem to be an issue with some Turkish journalists. Mustafa Karoglu is an Ankara-based columnist with the Daily Star, a paper that has been in Erdogan's corner since 2004, when it was seized by an asset management company controlled by the government.
Özel radyo televizyon kanallarının
private radio and TV channels aren't obliged to be balanced or give equal space to everyone. Private media might have a group they support, and they should be allowed to broadcast that. Of course, if it were more balanced, that would make everyone happy. But even if both sides were as visible or were represented equally, that wouldn't have changed the referendum result.
Yine sonuç böyle çıkacaktı.
Karoglu's latter point, that balanced coverage of the campaign would have made no difference, is highly debatable. His prior assertion that private media should not be required to be balanced is flat out wrong. Turkey's broadcasting regulations demand that private outlets provide even-handed news coverage, but having regulations is one thing, enforcing them is another. And the majority of officials at the regulatory agency responsible for that, RUTUK, have either been appointed by or support the AK Party government. The referendum took place in a country still under a state of emergency, established after last year's failed coup. The government blamed Gulenists, members of an Islamic social and educational movement, for trying to seize power, lumped them in with Kurdish separatists, and forced the closure of multiple channels and newspapers affiliated with each. But among the 170-plus media outlets shut down and all the journalists arrested have been TV channels and reporters who have nothing to do with either the Gulen movement or the Kurdish issue.
Many of the independent news outlets on the left have closed down or gone underground, meaning they go online. And even the more independent big media, CNN Turk, Hürriyet, these folks, it's obvious they're practicing some kind of self-censorship. They're not saying what they think, and I think there's a certain climate of fear in the media, in the mainstream media landscape.
Many of the country's journalists, including its best ones, have been arrested. Ahmet Şık is in jail. Can Dündar had to leave the country. In the past, it was still possible to have a leadership that tolerated media groups it didn't like. Not anymore. Now, the leadership refuses to answer questions it disagrees with, won't accredit journalists it doesn't like, or just arrests them.
Kapatılan medya kuruluşlarının
almost all of the media that were closed down supported terrorist groups or were producing propaganda for them. So when we say media outlets have been closed down or journalists have been imprisoned, let's not forget these categories. It's true that we know of some who were not propagandists.
olmadığı yönünde kanaatimiz olan kişiler var.
Even President Erdogan's backers acknowledge that some of the journalists behind bars should not be there. So where does his support come from? The Erdogan era has produced unprecedented economic growth in Turkey. The president has calculated correctly that pocketbook issues and political allegiances mean more to voters than mere freedom of expression. It would appear that he too has done the math. And all that extra news coverage, all that free FaceTime, doesn't hurt either. The lack of plurality on the Turkish airwaves has led to a proliferation of alternative news platforms online. Here are some of them. Uzguruz was launched 3 months ago by Can Dündar, the former editor of Cumhuriyet, now living in exile in Germany. It only lasted 2 days online in Turkey before being blocked by the Communications Authority. Gazete Duvar came online a month after last year's coup attempt. It reports on current affairs, and many journalists there say they lost their jobs in mainstream media outlets for reporting critically on the AK Party government. Hayır TV was set up during the referendum in support of the No camp. It posts interviews, infographics, and some live broadcasts. Its Turkish slogan, Tek adama karşı çok ses, means many voices against one man. Medyascope TV is the brainchild of ex-Haberturk daily columnist Rushan Çakır. It offers interviews with opposition voices no longer heard in the mainstream and provides daily news coverage via the social media app Periscope. And lest anyone think that there aren't enough pro-government voices on television, there are some more online. TVNet is a digital platform that also broadcasts over the airwaves. It has ties to members of President Erdogan's family and focuses on news and commentaries. Asen TV is a conservative news source known for its vox pop reporting style. Other media stories that are on our radar. Rumor became fact at Fox News this past week with the departure of top-rated anchor Bill O'Reilly over sexual harassment allegations. And on this story, the network has some spinning to do.
Bill O'Reilly, who hosted this program for 20 years, is leaving the Fox News channel.
A New York Times investigation published April 1st revealed that between them, O'Reilly and Fox have spent a total of $13 million settling 5 separate sexual harassment cases made against him. Then 2 more women came out and accused O'Reilly of harassing them. Fox finally dumped the anchor April 19th, and its media reporter went on the air with this.
Rupert Murdoch and his sons, James and Lachlan, have emphasized changing the company's culture so any form of harassment is unacceptable.
But it's not like the New York Times story was news to the Murdochs. They knew about the court cases because they shelled out most of the settlements, and they still renewed O'Reilly's contract just last month. It's only when the cases were made public and advertisers began fleeing the O'Reilly show that the company decided its so-called culture change was necessary. When British Prime Minister Theresa May called her snap election, she quickly ruled out taking part in television debates, knowing that on the Prince side, at least, the country's mostly pro-Brexit press already has her back. May says she wants to affirm her mandate to negotiate the UK's way out of the European Union. The Conservative Party's aversion to TV debates is not new. Former Prime Minister David Cameron, who resigned after backing the losing side in the Brexit referendum, landing May in the job, took part in only one such debate in the 2015 election. The opposition parties are saying May just wants to avoid scrutiny. Both the BBC and ITV say that they will proceed with the debates with or without the Prime Minister. The right-wing pro-Brexit press has greeted May's snap election call with glee. Rupert Murdoch's son called for blue murder to kill off the opposition, while the Daily Mail led with Crush the Saboteurs, a headline more suited to state-owned newspapers under authoritarian regimes than a country that calls itself the world's oldest liberal democracy. 6 weeks ago, we took a long look at the state of journalism in Chechnya. It's not good. Now, a reporter for a Moscow-based paper says she has had to flee the Russian Republic after publishing a story on an anti-gay campaign that has led to religious leaders calling for a massacre of journalists. Elena Milashina of Novaya Gazeta broke a story April 1st, sharing a byline with a colleague named Irina Gordienko. They reported that hundreds of gay men in Chechnya were being detained, abused, and in 3 cases killed in an apparent purge of homosexuals. The Chechen government called the Novaya Gazeta report an absolute lie, since it insisted there are no gay people in Chechnya to persecute. 2 days after the piece was published, a public meeting was called at a mosque in Grozny. It was attended by thousands and heard from a presidential advisor and preacher, Adam Shahidov. The meeting adopted a resolution which said that Novaya Gazeta journalists insulted the foundations of Chechen society, the dignity of Chechen men, promising vengeance. The Russian government has failed to respond to the story, prompting the paper to issue a statement. Silence and inaction in this situation make all who are able to do something accomplices. This is why Novaya Gazeta continues to work in Chechnya, but we are very aware of a high price we can pay. It's been an introspective few months for some media outlets and the journalists working for them. Among the questions they've been asking themselves, given the rise of Donald Trump, right-wing populist figures across Europe and as far east as the Philippines are, why didn't we see this coming? And how do we deal with these kinds of voices, long considered to be on the political fringes, now that they're here? At the heart of what is termed an open society is the idea that if all views get a fair hearing and a platform is provided for debate, then individuals can decide for themselves what to believe and society can reach some sort of consensus. But is that really the case? Or does giving these movements a media platform grant them a degree of normalcy that tells viewers that intolerant, racist, or otherwise bigoted views are legitimate and of equal value to their opposite? Some interviewers like to push back with aggressive questions and counter-arguments, but it's not always a winning formula with those who thrive on controversy and confrontation. The Listening Post's Will Yong now on some of the questions media outlets face with the resurgent far right demanding a place, its place, in the mainstream.
White people have a tremendous amount of power.
Islam en vrijheid gaat niet samen.
The growth of Islam should be one of the most disturbing things for everybody in this room.
Rising right-wing populism has given journalists around the world plenty to think about. Last year, just days after the election of Donald Trump in the United States, a letter appeared in a Dutch newspaper, signed by the chairwoman of the Dutch public broadcaster, NPO. She apologised for NPO's past coverage and vowed that Dutch publicly funded media would work harder from now on to include more voices, different voices. Many read this as a promise to give more airtime to supporters of the Dutch Party for Freedom, whose leader, Geert Wilders, has a conviction for inciting hatred against minorities and pledges to make the Netherlands ours again.
After Donald Trump's election, there are those who say this forgotten group of people who created such a surprise in America needs to be more visible on the Dutch public broadcaster. People who are often against immigration, against globalization, against the European Union. They say these opinions are not heard enough, but this is not true. These opinions definitely get enough attention.
I don't think there is a good argument for keeping them out of the spotlight. You have to remember that these people have huge followings. Because we have to understand, like, where is the support coming from? And, like, putting our heads in the sand and thinking that it's just going to go away doesn't work. The more light, the better.
But shedding light can also cast a long shadow. In the run-up to the recent Dutch elections, a full-page letter appeared in all of the major newspapers that seemed to issue an ultimatum to the country's migrant communities. Refuse to adapt, criticise our values, and you can go home. Behave normally or go away. The call was not from Wilders or the far right, but from the centre-right Prime Minister, Mark Rutte.
And that was due to excessive media coverage of Geert Wilders as a man and his party's policies overall. So Mark Rutte had to really adapt his position and his platform in order to make sure that he wasn't being outflanked by the far right. So he puts out this open letter saying, behave normally or go home. That's classic far right rhetoric.
The problem with Geert Wilders is that journalists are reluctant to question him forcefully.
Stel dat u premier wordt, gaat u dan uw toon matigen?
Ik was het niet van plan. Ik denk dat ik een hele redelijke toon heb.
They get starstruck and end up talking superficially for fear of being seen as a Wilders basher. They don't ask him about specifics because a lot of his ideas are against the law, like banning the Quran. He denies that the Quran would literally be taken from everybody's homes, and a journalist will be nodding instead of asking, how can you even suggest this?
Wat bedoel je daar dan mee? In the United States, the media profile of the far right has been boosted by a rebrand.
Please welcome Tommy Lahren.
Michael Cernovich, who describes himself as right of center politically.
Since Donald Trump was elected president, prominent figures from the so-called alt-right have been hosted on some of the highest platforms in mainstream media. Former Breitbart editor Milo Yiannopoulos gained notoriety for airing racist, misogynist and bigoted views and was banned from Twitter as a result. Does hosting him on a primetime talk show, as Bill Maher did, allow audiences to understand him better?
You say you don't hire gay people.
Oh no, you can't trust them to show up to work on time. Too much drugs, too much sex, they never show up to work, always making excuses. No. I mean, not as bad as women, but no, I don't hire gays.
But you know
that time on Bill Maher showed the offensiveness of his views, and to me it was the perfect example of why not letting these people slip under the radar is the best strategy.
I think you're colossally wrong.
A lot of people said, like, good for Bill Maher, let's have him bring on all of these alt-right people and sort of expose them for what they are.
Bill Maher didn't do anything to expose Yiannopoulos.
You're
I'm a little
special
broken.
kind of animal.
He was chummy, he was laughing. He wasn't doing the work of a journalist. The kind of surrounding, echoing laughter, I think really kind of sanitized it.
You're the only good one.
No,
You're literally the only good one.
Milo's politics were not critiqued or interrogated at all. The Bill Maher show became the Milo show. Bill Maher is someone that he wants to be seen agreeing with, right? Because that normalizes him.
No, I love it. I get off on
From
it.
the convivial to the confrontational.
Look at these headlines. Would you rather your child had feminism or cancer?
Kathy Newman of Britain's Channel 4 News used her interview with Yiannopoulos to challenge him head-on. Satisfying perhaps for Channel 4's liberal-leaning audience, but did Newman succeed, or did Yiannopoulos get exactly what he came for?
One of the flaws that you saw in that Channel 4 argument is that I think it just fed this opposition that their supporters love.
Are we supposed to just soak it up and take it as one big joke?
You're supposed to treat it as it's intended and not wrench it from context.
You know, the question is, did it give off light or was it just heat? In that case, I think it was just heat.
Someone like Milo Yiannopoulos thrives absolutely on the confrontation. That is what they exist for. There is a point in that interview where Kathy Newman says, "You must allow me to speak."
I know you want women to log off the internet, but we are now in the Channel 4 News studio. You have to allow me to speak.
At that point, you've lost control. The host should be the one dictating the way that the argument, that the conversation goes.
Sunlight, so the saying goes, is the best disinfectant. Shed light on the views of racists and bigots, and the public will see them for what they are and reject them. But these days, as the media grant far-right figures the spotlight, a shop window, if you will, in the free marketplace of ideas, the market for their ideas only seems to be expanding, and journalists often seem to lack the tools to fight back.
The free marketplace of ideas, it is a lovely idea, but of course, as with any marketplace, there are imbalances. The media has a role to play editorially in who it chooses to speak and who do we choose not to speak. That does mean that some voices are marginalised, that means that some voices are over-promoted. It's a constant process.
If
you're interviewing someone with extreme right views, you're actually giving him a stage in the media by doing so. In a society experiencing distinct tensions and movements, it would be absurd for a public broadcaster not to pay attention, because their objective is to reflect society. But there is a difference between providing a platform and being permissive, and it can be hard to draw this line.
All we as journalists have in our arsenal is facts. At the end of the day, that's all we have to argue with. It's frustrating because a lot of these groups don't respond fact with fact. They respond fact with allegation or fact with argument, but we need to stick with what we do. And we have to hope that at the end the public will come around.
Historically, free speech was never the speech of the oppressed. It was never the speech of those at the margins. It was always speech that reproduces dominant discourses. Why don't we try and interview undocumented migrants? Why don't we interview trans students affected by bathroom laws? Why don't we talk to EU nationals who are worried about the protection of their citizenship? That's protecting free speech by democratizing a platform, not offering it to the same old racist faces again and again.
Finally, France heads to the polls this weekend in round one of the country's presidential election. Somewhere along the way, someone noticed that French campaign rallies look a lot like rock concerts. What with the staging, the theatrics, the frenzied crowds, all that's missing is the band. But with a little editing, a bit of auto-tuning, and the right track, you can blur the line between politician and rock star even further. Khaled Freak is a French-based YouTube channel that mashes up politics with heavy metal. So we leave you with the Socialist Party's nominee, Benoit Hamon, versus the En Marche candidate, Emmanuel Macron. And we'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.
quand je regarde Marseille, je vois une ville française façonnée par 2000 ans d'histoire.